This is No Talking in the Library, a media podcast produced by Mentor Public Library, where we'll be talking about movies, comics, TV shows, basically anything we think is interesting. Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Meredith.
And this is No Talking in the Library, coming to you from the bridge of the USCSS Nostromo, orbiting above some random planet, LV-426, I think. Anyway, the ship got a distress signal and brought us here, and we don't really know what's down on the surface. Maybe we'll go down and check it out once we're done here.
But before we do that, we're going to get the first episode of this podcast going. Today we're going to be talking about the TV show Supergirl. You can get the first season of Supergirl from the library, or you can stream it on Netflix or from the CW's website. Before we dig in, though, let me talk a little bit about the show. Supergirl is a television series about Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El. When the show starts, she, unlike Superman, has been hiding her abilities. She works as an assistant to media mogul Cat Grant and is doing her best to live a normal life. However, an accident involving her adoptive sister forces Kara to reveal herself, and she must step into the role as Supergirl. And that's really where the show kicks off. She's coming into her own as a superhero. There are a few twists. For example, you find out her sister is actually working for a secret government organization called the DEO, or the Department of Extranormal Operations. And it's within that organization that Kara works alongside her sister to protect the Earth from alien threats.
They're now in season 2 of the show, and I think on the one hand we're really gratified about this because there was some doubt that it was going to get renewed. It started out on CBS in October of 2015, and it's a show that's centered on a young woman superhero, and there has traditionally been a certain degree of doubt among network executive type people that that's going to be a saleable type of proposition. It was fortunate in the sense to start out on CBS because CBS is a little bit slower to pull the trigger when they're going to cut away non-performing type assets. But after the first season, they moved to the CW for the second season, and this resulted in a number of changes. Number one was that Callista Flockhart, who had been very good as Cat Grant in the first season, went off the show. I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that the show had originally shot in LA. CW shows shoot in Vancouver, and I just don't think that Callista Flockhart wanted to move up to Vancouver, much as Vancouver's a very nice place. So her character was replaced, and it also changed some things about the way that the Supergirl character lived her life, so that in the first season, a lot of the story was about Kara being a sort of young professional woman trying to find her way, and Cat Grant, the Callista Flockhart character, being a sort of mentor to her and shaping the way that she confronted the world, confronted her professional life. And when Callista Flockhart went off the show, that created a space for Kara to become something else. But the question really is now, like, what have they used that to make her, and is that working in the way that we would want it to work?
The interactions between Cat Grant and Kara Danvers in season 1 was really a highlight for the entire 20-episode order, and that loss has been noticeable as we've gone into season 2. And one of the interesting things about it is that Cat Grant acted as not just a mentor for her assistant Kara Danvers, but she also acted as a mentor for Supergirl. Because, like I mentioned before, Supergirl is just starting to come out as a hero. And one of the other interesting things about their interactions, and I would probably argue that it wasn't intentional, I doubt that it was written in the script this way, but just a matter of there being a few decades between Callista Flockhart and Supergirl, is played by Melissa Benoist. You have this examination of the conflict between third wave feminism and millennial feminism, which I don't think really is being explored on any other show. So Cat Grant really is the embodiment of this working girl type of woman. She's had the opportunity to get her foot in the door in these industries that may not have otherwise been available to women a few decades earlier, but in order to move up in these businesses, she's had to sort of eschew various feminine aspects of her life. So we're talking pantsuits with big shoulder pads, didn't talk about family, put off having children because in order to break through that glass ceiling, she had to be seen as one of the boys. She had to be taken seriously as a man. On the other hand, you have Kara Danvers, who's very much the prototypical millennial feminist. She's cute, she's fashionable, she's active on social media, hashtag activism. She fights for things like closing the wage gap and paid maternity leave, and none of these things are inherently bad. In fact, many of them are good, but you almost get the sense that these older women look at people like Kara Danvers and see them as soft, and they think they don't appreciate the things that they had to sacrifice to get to this point. What I think is really happening is that these younger women are looking to the women who came before them and saying, no, they've proved that women are more than capable of handling these high-powered, high-pressured, high-stress positions, but now I'm going to prove that we can do these jobs but also reclaim that femininity. And I think you see this sort of play out because it's right there in the title, Supergirl, girls are powerful. That is the theme that runs through this show.
Yeah, there's a big change in the move from the first season to the second season in the respect that there was, in pretty much every episode in the first season, there would be at least one moment at which Cat Grant would call Supergirl or Kara aside and sort of dress them down in a more or less severe way for not being hard enough, not being aggressive enough, not doing the things that she and her generation had to do to be successful. And a lot of what the show was about in that moment was exactly what you're saying, that it's about the difference between Cat Grant's generation and the generation coming up. And Cat Grant is no longer in the picture except for sort of, she makes a kind of cameo. Now they've taken the Jimmy Olsen character, played by McCad Brooks, who had been her sort of love interest in the first, and I think we're all glad that wasn't sort of kept on because they had really zero chemistry. But he's a sort of dynamic young African-American actor. They put him in the position of being the head of Catco, or sort of the position that Cat Grant was in vis-a-vis Catco. And he's become a kind of non-entity there. And we can talk about some other ways that affects the show, but what it means is now that Kara is in the position of really sort of finding her own way without this kind of mentor. It would be fair to say that there's been a kind of loss of direction in the second season, basically, compared to how the first season was.
That's one of the more noticeable things about season 2. Losing Cat Grant as very much the center of the show has left this sort of black hole that Kara could have stepped into as being a role model to some of the other characters who have joined the cast, but that hasn't really happened. And so now what we've got is a show that has no focus, a show that's ostensibly supposed to be about Supergirl is now sort of about Supergirl, but all of these other things that may or may not be tethered to her character.
Yeah, they seem to do a number of episodes and characters where they were kind of throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. And there's this sort of Jimmy Olsen becomes a superhero wearing a mech suit type of thing, which was not, I don't think, really necessary. I mean, number one, why does everyone have to be a superhero? It seemed also to be one of the things where they wanted to give an augmented role to the character of Win Shot, who was he had been the kind of tech guy at Catco, and then all of a sudden, and sort of wanted to go out with Kara, but then it wasn't happening, which is fine. He was cool with it. I mean, they've been sort of mercifully light on the whole will she, won't she thing with her boyfriends. I mean, they haven't sort of gotten around to the idea that she might not want to have one, but that's fine. You know, this is major market television. I understand that there are certain things that they just feel like they've got to put in. But then Wynn became sort of the tech guy at the DEO, which is a little funny. You'd think that they might have access to some better hackers than him. But that's okay, too. But then they seem to feel the need to make him into this character and to make the Guardian character that Jimmy Olsen was sort of having as his alternate identity a part of the show. And that just seemed to be not something that was really moving the plot forward in any significant way. And also, they brought in the character of McGann, Miss Martian, who is sort of another canonical character from the comics. But then they didn't really do a great deal with her.
That's probably my number one most frustrating thing about season 2, because even before they announced that they were bringing in the Miss Martian character to the show, that was my number one wish for the show, is having this character, because she's a really fun character. She doesn't have so much backstory that you couldn't play around with it. She could be used in a couple of different ways, and so when they did say that this was going to be a part of season 2, I was really excited. And then was pretty much immediately let down by how little they planned on using her. Because Miss Martian is also an alien, there's a lot that you can do with the interplay between Kara Danvers, alien, and McGann, alien, in terms of the way they see the world differently, the different beliefs about what they owe the people of Earth, and just the idea of Kara having another female friend, just anything, and they ended up doing none of those things.
Yeah, now the thing you got to know too is that the DEO is run by John Jones, who is another canonical comic book character, the Martian Manhunter. And Mars was sort of riven by a kind of genocidal conflict in which the white Martians killed off all the green Martians. John Jones is ostensibly the last of the green Martians, and it turns out that McGann is a white Martian who helped some green Martians to escape, ostensibly, and so there's that sort of tension between the two of them, as you might expect. And that was a sort of, it seemed like something really interesting that they could have explored about, how do people relate to each other after these kind of horrible events, and how would they relate to each other being on Earth, and what did they see as their role? And at the same time, the McGann character also offered the opportunity to give Kara a female friend, which she lacks, and that is a really strange thing.
Kara Danvers is the kind of person you would expect to have a whole posse of female friends surrounding her, and as we go on and she interacts with basically her sister and her other alien friends, it becomes very odd and not quite thought through all the way, and I think almost to the point where you start to see the strings behind the scenes where the men in charge don't fully understand how female friendships work.
I mean, it's worth saying too at this point that, if you hear us saying critical things about this, a lot of this has to do with the fact that we've watched this show with a sort of very critical eye, and it's really an entertaining show, and I have to say I'm really gratified that CW picked it up for a second season and that they seem ready to go further with it, because it really serves a market that's very underserved. Traditionally, comics has been a boy thing, it's been a guy thing, and it's only sort of fairly recently that the writers and producers of comics have started to take on the idea of women as a possible target audience. And I think that's, it's an important thing in the respect that growing up, I always had comic books and I looked at them and I saw myself reflected in them. And for girls I knew growing up, that just wasn't the case. And so, I think it's an important thing that they are willing to do this show and provide a kind of role model for young women in a sort of medium where they've been kind of lacking in the past.
I think the idea of Kara Danvers' role model segues nicely into what is probably considered the most divisive point of season 2, and that was the arrival of Daxamite alien Monel. He is from a planet that one might consider a hedonistic, very male-centered planet, and he's arrived here, and Kara has sort of decided to take him under her wing and mentor him in the ways of a superhero.
They have built into this a sort of interesting relationship between the two of them, because Daxam was another planet in the same system as Krypton, was destroyed at the same time. Monel was a member of sort of Daxamite royal house. Apparently, it becomes clear that this is the case, although Kara still at this point doesn't really know. Daxam was apparently the sort of planet of the Dude Bros, so they have a very different culture. They have a very fraught relationship with the Kryptonians, which comes out, and it's really interesting. The unfortunate thing is that they then decide, the writers of the show then decide, that they're going to make Monel her boyfriend. And this has caused, if you look at Tumblr sites about this show, and hopefully we can provide some links to at least the more PG-rated commentary about this. People are really upset about it, but some people really like it too. I mean, it's really a fascinating sort of division within the fan community for this show.
And it's not necessarily the relationship between Mon-El and Kara in and of itself. It's the way that the writers have decided to pull them together. They often have these sort of, I think, what are supposed to be sort of sexually tension-laden arguments, but what they end up having are just two completely different opinions about very fundamental features of relationships.
The question you sort of find yourself asking as a thinking person is really, why are they together? Because repeatedly he does these things, he's very sort of patronizing to her in a kind of a dude way, and that's fine. I mean, it reflects reality. That's what happens, except that Kara is really, I think, ideally meant to be a role model. She's meant to be someone who's very concerned with her own agency, and sort of the point of the character, in a certain sense, is that she is a young woman who really is concerned about the preservation of her own agency. And then she gets hooked up with this guy who thinks that every time there's a problem, he has to fix it, and that he has to protect her, even though she's a lot more powerful than he is. And one thing, another thing that's worth knowing about him is that he's got powers because of the yellow sun, but he doesn't have the same powers she does, so he's not bulletproof and he can't fly, but he is super strong. A lot of the story sort of works on, will he become some sort of hero? Will he decide to take on the role of helping to protect the Earth? But at the same time, it works on how will he relate to her, and she has to tell him on several occasions that I can think of that he can't be patronizing to her, and really, she should only have to tell him that one time. Because after that, really, she should just say, sorry, this isn't working out. Let's just, go our separate ways.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest concern with the relationship between Kara and Mon-El, because this is a show being watched by young girls, and the lesson that they're demonstrating, that I don't think they realize they're doing, but they are, is that when a boy is jealous or gets angry at his girlfriend because she goes out without telling him or has a different opinion, it's his way of showing that he likes you. And that's a really terrible lesson to be showing young girls, or that his problems are your problems to fix. And that's really not the lesson that needs to be on display in Supergirl.
He's not all bad. I mean, he's funny. He says some really funny things all the time, and they have sort of his role being, at one point they're talking to some people who are, I think, taking them prisoner, and he makes some comment about, yes, we're very into our gods, and she has to correct him, no God. And he's like, yes, our one God. And that's funny. He brings a kind of comic relief, and it would be fine if he was just going to do that. But unfortunately, he seems to want to, or the writers of the show want to make him into this kind of love interest, which has some very unfortunate consequences, you were just saying. And so there is some sign, if you watch the show, and we're about, I think, maybe 2/3 of the way through season 2, that there may be rethinking this or going to go a different direction with this. I think we're very hopeful that there's some people, if you read Tumblr, who really are unalterably opposed to him as a character. But there's some people who recognize that he can be an interesting part of the show, just not the way he's being used right now. Given that we've noted some things that we're not entirely satisfied with the show, if you could pick one thing that you were going to change about this show, what would it be?
It would have been getting rid of Jimmy Olsen, but at this point the show seems to have done that already. He has been a very minimal presence in the last few episodes, so now it would have to be sending Mon-El on his way. And if I am correct in reading the writing on the wall, I'm pretty sure he's not much longer going to be with us.
Yeah, I have a suspicion that that's true, and I agree. I think that his usefulness in the show has been a little bit compromised, because if he's not going to be her boyfriend, he kind of loses substance as a character in the show. And I think, once again, you're correct that if you read the tea leaves about what's going on in recent episodes, probably he shouldn't buy any long-term real estate in the capital city or national city metropolitan area. But So I think that if they were going to change the show, probably that's. I mean, I agree too about Jimmy Olsen. Really, they have kind of fridged the McCab Brooks character. I don't know why they just didn't. I mean, I don't know why they didn't get rid of him altogether, because he doesn't seem to be really playing a significant role in the show. It's just another one of those things that just kind of, let's see if this thing works in the plot, and it's had some unfortunate consequences, I think. But that might be working itself out too.
If you're interested in Supergirl, even more so than just watching the show, you can actually find a pretty decent selection of digital comics on Hoopla, which we will link to when we post this. I personally recommend Supergirl Cosmic Adventures of the 8th Grade. It's the most fun of the bunch. You can also find a series of young adult novels. DC and Marvel seem to be attempting to reach out to a wider audience, getting into publishing full-length novels. And some of the pretty decent ones are the Lois Lane series by Gwenda Bond, the Black Widow series by Margaret Stoll, and Wonder Woman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo, which is actually not out till August. So keep that on your radar if this is something you're interested in.
Yeah, it should be probably mentioned too that the Supergirl as it is on the show is not quite canonical with Supergirl as she's existed in the comics, which is fine. We don't necessarily need it to be. In some respects, it's probably for the best, since a number of aspects of the comics have not been completely ideal, including some of her costumes, which you really have to wonder what the thinking was. There's one that we were talking about, I remember a couple of months ago, where she's wearing like knee-level boots that have the knee open but something behind the knee, which if you're going to be fighting people seems like maybe not the 100% best design idea, but what do I know? So we'll maybe post some of these bad Supergirl costume ideas on the website too once we post this as well. But that's all we have for today, and hopefully we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about further things that keep us occupied as librarians.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening.
No Talking in the Library is a production of Mentor Public Library. Opinions expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily express those of the library or the library board. You can find our webpage on the library's website at www.mentorpl.org/adults/no talking. Our sound editor is Marilyn Wiest. Our webpage is maintained by Mary Pelton.